Boardroom Bound, Episode 17, How to Build Your Board Brand with Matt Craven.
Your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Boardroom Bound. My name is Alexander Lowry and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership in the boardroom. My goal is to give new and aspiring directors the tips, tactics, and strategies necessary to transform your confidence and build a successful career as a board director. Quick reminder that you can get all of today's show notes at podcast.gordon.edu. Now, in today's show, we're going to be continuing a conversation we started a month ago with Matt Craven. Matt is spending at least 3 episodes over 3 months with us, giving us the expertise that we need in different areas to be successful. And Matt is a personal branding and career development expert, and he's the founder of the CV and Interview Advisors, as well as LinkedIn Incredible. In short, he helps aspiring and existing board members to sell themselves more effectively and secure more director roles. Now, in today's show, I am delighted to welcome back Matt. He added so much value to us a month ago in episode 13, explaining how to build the board resume, which is different from an executive resume. And today, he's going to be sharing all about personal branding, for example, how that works in your LinkedIn profile, specifically as one example, but also thought leadership in general, how you position yourself as someone of authority and how you go about sharing that information such that your brand precedes you, the information is out there, people begin to associate you with that level of expertise. And as we did last time, I will be the guinea pig for this. So Matt will be using my LinkedIn profile, sharing some feedback on it, this general approach and strategies and tips, but also so you can see how it's applied to someone. So he will once again very gently tear mine apart and tell me where we can do better, which is what all of us need. That's what we're growing, developing for. And also, if you stick around at the very end, we have another special offer from Matt. Last time he offered a free resume critique from his professional staff. This time he has more expertise to help people with their personal branding. Specific offers just for people on this audience. Let's jump into the show. Matt Craven, delighted to have you back on the Boardroom Bound podcast. Welcome back.
Yeah, great to be back again, Alexander. Really enjoyed talking last time around. So great to be back, and hopefully I can add some value to this session, which is one of my favorite topics. Is this? So,
well, the month has flown by since episode 13, when you did a great introduction to resumes and how to prepare them, and we did a bit of critique of mine, and we'll have those as examples if people click into the show notes to see the value added there. And I know today is an amazing topic that we can all wrap our head around. Personal branding. We know we're going to need to do that for the board. And what does it actually look like? Probably most of us translate that over into LinkedIn, thinking about that's how the world sees us. Clearly, perhaps a bit of social media as well, but thought leadership shouldn't be lost. This is an opportunity to use those platforms like LinkedIn and social media to show how you are an expert in the topic, covering what we did last time on the resume about you have a unique selling point. What's your expertise around that? So there's so much that you're going to be sharing with us today, and thrilled to have you back.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, great.
So let's kick it off with personal branding. Perhaps you can just give us some context of what that actually means. What's it all about?
Yeah, well, our good friend Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, I like the way that he describes personal branding. His quote is that your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Right.
And I love that because it sums it up perfectly. And it's how the world views you. But if you think about companies, they have a brand, they have a positioning, they have the things that they stand for, they have their position in the marketplace, they have their corporate values. And in many ways, your personal brand is exactly the same thing. It's just about you as a person, rather than you as a company. Although, the two things actually, if you think about looking for board advisory roles, you are a service at the end of the day. You're providing a service to that board. And with that in mind, and I think that stands true of anybody applying for any kind of position. If you view yourself as a service provider, you think about the fact that they're going to pay you a fairly vast amount of money if you're looking at C-level roles, and they're looking for you to deliver return on investment on that, on that money they're investing in you, working for them, then that really just alludes to the fact that you are selling yourself as a service, and about your personal brand and what you stand for and how you want to position yourself and how you want the world to see you is all part of that. And then when you write your resume, your CV, your LinkedIn profile, that all should it should flow, but the starting point has to be thinking about what your personal brand is. Right. And then you can start managing it and making sure that there's some thought process behind how you want the world to see you.
So Matt, in some ways, when we did our first episode last month, we talked about how to build the resume for a board role. And we did talk about a bit of your brand and your thought leadership and your unique selling point. But perhaps we should put this in context. Is the work on your personal brand first, what you're going to be known for, what your specialization is, and then you reflect that in places like your resume, like your LinkedIn profile? Is that the way we should think about
it? Yes. Well, that's a really good point. And I think so. But I think your personal brand evolves and grows and develops over the course of time. But I think your way of looking at it, in the sense that certainly your resume is a vehicle for describing what your value to an organization is. Your personal brand is probably something that's a bit broader than that in many ways. And a good way to think about it is your professional footprint all starts to feed into what your personal brand is. So all your activity you do on LinkedIn, the posts that you release to the world, the associations you have with other people, any noise you make in your marketplace all starts to build this professional footprint, which all starts to dictate how people view you as a professional. And that is your personal brand.
I absolutely agree. So I would imagine, let's say we're having this conversation now, and it could be myself, could be one of our listeners. We realize during the course of this episode, you know what? I'm going to be a board member who's focused on financial services and fintech, and I am an SEC financial expert, and this is the channel that I'm going to go down. So I need to help change the mindset of the people who are thinking about me. So for example, you've got people who know you in your job today, and maybe you want a different job in the future, might be, say, a portfolio of board roles. You're going to have to change their mindset. And one of the ways you can begin to do that is changing just how you use social media and what you post. No more images of your dog. No more talks about your family vacation. Now it's thought leadership in these specific areas, which over time, they will consistently begin to think of you differently. Do you agree that's a mechanism about how this might come about?
I do, yes, very, very much so. And it has to be a choice. It's a decision you make. You can let it just happen by accident, but then your personal brand will just end up being whatever it will be, whether that is positive or negative, who knows? But if you start to manage it, most organizations have somebody that works in their marketing department who's responsible for the brand. Right. In fact, some larger organizations have people who will, their sole purpose in life is making sure that people don't use their logo in the wrong place, in the wrong size.
So, for example, JP Morgan, in my previous role, they had a giant team that just focused on Twitter. That was all they did, because all day long, there are people that are pinging the company, unhappy about things that happened in a branch or the online service, and they're just responding all day long because they're trying to manage the brand and people's perception of it.
Exactly. So, and it's everything that goes out externally into a company or an individual's marketplace. All these little micro level bits of communication that go out to the world, they all start to build this picture, and the smart people will manage that and dictate how the world views them. It's things like, I see a lot of people who I know are very talented, who don't have a background image on their LinkedIn profile.
Oh, it's free advertising. I don't understand that.
Yeah. You've got one, I've got one. You can do all sorts of things with that, but it builds a picture. I look at your photograph on your LinkedIn profile, and, you look smart, you've got a smile, you're wearing a suit, you've brushed your hair, it's a professional shot. It all adds up to how people start to view you, and that's really important. On the other end of the scale, I have seen a photograph on LinkedIn, and this is the photo that this person had. This is a FTSE 250 CEO whose picture was him downing a pint of lager in a pub.
Well, maybe if you worked for an alcoholic beverage industry, that could work, but otherwise. But that's, maybe, again, knowing your target audience, right? How you want to position yourself. I mean, here's one of the things that I find interesting is, obviously my photo was professionally done. We worked very hard to build that image. I use that exact same image on all of my social media sites, on my Google email and everywhere else, because that's what I want people to recognize and remember about me, so it's consistent. Sometimes even those little things can fall under the radar, right?
Well, absolutely, yeah. You have to be a perfectionist. And actually, I'll let you into a little secret. I changed my photograph recently because I had a very nice, professionally done photograph, but I had it done about 10 years ago. And actually, 10 years on, back then the level that we operated at in terms of helping people with resumes and interview technique and all that kind of good stuff, we probably operated at a little bit more of a junior level, and we've very much now gravitated towards the top end of the marketplace. So I felt that having a photograph of me, actually I think I was in my early 30s at the time, but when you think about our demographic, they're usually people who are in their somewhere between mid 40s and late 50s, right. and so their perception is they would want to be working with an organization that is their peer. They don't want to be looking at an organization thinking, well, who's this young buck?
Well, also as well, if you show up and your photo looks different from 10 years ago, they go, that's not who I thought I was coming in to see.
Well, quite right. And I certainly do have a few more of those gray hairs and whiskers that we talked about in the last session. But I my photograph, and I think my photograph is okay, but you know what? It pains me every time I see it because it's not perfect. So I'm going to get a professional photographer to do a better one, because I'm managing my personal brand. And, I could be happy. It looks okay. It's a little bit grainy, but nothing inherently wrong with it. But it's not perfect. And we have to be perfect because it's those small little tiny details that can make all the difference.
Well, and the personal brand is so many elements that come together. So the photo that we've talked about, you were talking about the background and the imagery that you're going to use on LinkedIn, on your social media profiles. If you are trying to position yourself for a board role, professional is the standard you're going for. Now, there might be differences if you're applying to startups in a tech industry, right? But in general, let's say you want to be in financial services, it's probably got to look bottomed up. It's probably going to look very professional, very staid. But you have to be conscious of that because you're building it. Also, that will be then reflected in the language you're using in your document, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when I am, and I'm not here to do that today, but when I am selling the services that we provide, our resume writing services, our CV writing services, our LinkedIn authoring services, the first thing I say to people is, well, hang on a second. Would you ever go to a business meeting with a homemade business card? and never in the history of me saying that has anybody said, oh yeah, I would. And I said, well, why would you go to market with a homemade LinkedIn profile and a homemade CV and a homemade resume? Because they're just, in fact, certainly LinkedIn is far more important than a business card, far more important, because that's what it is really the modern day business card folder, right? Your LinkedIn profile is where you keep all your business contacts all in one place. I used to, collect business cards from business contacts and put them in a little leather folder, but that's what LinkedIn really is now. It's just an online version of that. So, if people spend all this time and energy and care and attention on their business card, then it's I find it quite surprising. And I'm not just talking about it here from a job seeking perspective. I'm talking about it from a personal branding perspective, how people in your industry view you, how people can operate in their industry with a cobbled together, poorly written, half-done LinkedIn profile and not realize that in the year 2019 that has significant ramifications on how their marketplace and key people in their marketplace see them. I think it's so important that people really jump on board and realize how these things affect their ongoing career and how successful they are in their particular industry.
And in many ways, and we talked about resumes last time, but at the top of my resume, I have a hyperlink to my LinkedIn profile because that's where I want to drive people. I can give a lot of detail. I can share the right imagery. It's electronic. They can find it. I'm totally bought in and sold that LinkedIn is essential to do it. But it's, in a sense, it's just a vehicle for our personal brand. That's one way we're going to reflect it and bring it forward. And so it's just another, it's another arrow in our quiver. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But an essential one, clearly. It's probably the first arrow you're going to pull out, that in your resume.
Yeah. And I mean, I think when we look at LinkedIn profiles in general, and maybe this is a good opportunity to have a look at yours, but I think that there's probably 2 or 3 different scenarios depending on what your objectives are. The first point is that you want people to land on your LinkedIn profile and come to the conclusion that actually, you know what, this person looks sharp, they look professional, they look orderly, there's some attention to detail. It looks like they've bothered with their online public profile. So that's the first thing you want people to kind of come away feeling once they've interacted with your LinkedIn profile. And certainly when I look at yours, you come away with that. You've got a background image, which is that bit at the top where you've got the bit that says plan, strategy, business, and that nice little graphic behind your photograph. I think that looks great. You've got a really good photograph, look really sharp, great picture. You've used a few them stars are probably emojis or wingdings, symbols, give it a little bit of visual appeal. So that looks, you know what, a lot of people don't know you can use those. So you've automatically made yourself look a bit more savvy than the average person because you've used those stars. People will be thinking, yeah, that looks good. Yeah. And then you've got some nice words and information in there. So, you can see you've got some videos in there. So overall, you look at this and you think, you know what? Yeah, this is a well joined up professional executive who's put some time and effort into this and definitely come away feeling that this is a positive professional footprint. The next level up is then what are you saying to the world? Who's your target audience? What is it that they're looking for? What is it you can offer them? And how will that benefit them? And that's probably the bit that might need a bit of thought on your part. If you remember when we did the resume session, I talked about how your resume talked more about you than your target audience. And probably that same point applies to your LinkedIn profile. Okay. Although, as I said before, that and I said again, there's some great information here. There's nothing wrong with anything you've written, but I just wonder whether this was written sort of almost as a introspective exercise where you sat down and thought about yourself and wrote about yourself, or whether it was done as a very marketing target audience exercise where you were thinking about your target audience, what their needs, hopes, fears, and challenges are, and then crafting some copy around your target audience's needs, wants, desires, and challenges to create a really compelling LinkedIn profile that talks directly to your target audience and almost makes them want to jump inside and say, yes, come and talk to me because you can solve our problem.
Now, Matt, this is an interesting segue, and I think you're spot on for the way I went about it. For some of our audience, I'd say the majority of our audience is, like you talked about a poll on the previous episode, 80% are probably aspirational. And for people saying, I want to be a board of director, in sort of a chicken egg thing. I can't write the experiences I've had because I haven't had them yet. So I need to begin to sell myself, position myself as the authority. How would someone go about crafting that LinkedIn profile, and probably related to the resume as well, to share those message and the imagery and almost project themselves forward? Imagine a headline, right? You're not going to say aspiring board member, but that's really what you want to say.
Yeah, I think you say, I help boards or I help companies to do X, Y, Z. That's how I would start the headline. If I look at yours, Alexander, you've got Professor of Finance, Director of Master of Science in Financial Analysis Program, and FinTech Board of Directors member. All that's great, but at some point you need to leave enough space to put dash, I help companies or I help organizations with or to do XYZ. And everybody out there can apply that same methodology. Just think about what it is that you help companies to do or with, and home in on that.
Because at the end of the day, the headline is the most important part. That's your main advertising, and that's what people are going to take away from it. And what are your views on that versus, you see some people do keyword rich?
Well, certainly that comes into play as well, because of course, if this was a website, we'd be talking about search engine optimization. Well, it is a website, and we do need to search engine optimize it. So certainly putting some keywords into your summary section, and also using the key skill section that sort of exists as a proper section, making sure that those are filled out with all the correct skills is really, really useful. And then in the summary section, we talk about, I guess if you've not had a certain level of experience, that's one thing. But I assume that if you're applying for a certain type of role, you're confident, you back yourself to be able to do whatever it is that role would require you to do. So if you look at the summary section of LinkedIn as a positioning piece, it's not necessarily about justification and talking about your experience. It's more about telling the reader what you can do for them and how that will help their business.
Right.
Now, if you've got some examples that you can use to back it up, well, that's fantastic. By all means, do that. But if you haven't got direct experience, or you don't feel you've quite got the experience, doesn't matter, because as long as you feel you can do that role, then, as I say, it's more of a positioning piece. It's the summary section is more explaining what it is that you do, how that will help people, and who you do it for.
And that makes sense. And, I want to put a link in the show notes to yours as well. I find yours fascinating and I would love for you to break this down. So you've got tons of detail in there, lots of information. You even have hashtags, which are only beginning to really become part of LinkedIn now. Maybe you can talk us through the approach that you've taken. There's some great sectioning and signposting and hashtags, that sort of information.
Yeah, and funnily enough, actually, I wouldn't use mine as an example of best practice. It certainly isn't the way that my team of copywriters would necessarily write a LinkedIn profile.
Okay.
The reason why is because I run two businesses. I run the CV and Interview Advisors, and I run LinkedIn Credible. LinkedIn Credible does copywriting for businesses who want to up their game with LinkedIn, not just copywriting, we do coaching and training as well. So that's one business. The other business is more aimed at sort of senior professionals and executives with more of a job seeker focus. So we do resume writing, CV writing, interview technique, LinkedIn profiles for those people. But then also we do outplacement, which is a completely different thing altogether. That's helping companies who are making redundancies. And then the final part, which is what I use my LinkedIn profile more than anything else, is when we're doing business development and we're reaching out to what we call partners. So this might be, we work with quite a lot of chartered institutes and associations and big membership organizations who, have lots of members who might be qualified accountants or qualified IT people. So we kind of work in partnership with those sorts of people to provide this kind of advice to their members, which of course results in business coming our way. So I might run a campaign to target the heads of membership or heads of member engagement for, large bodies and membership organizations. Then I might be doing some work to promote our LinkedIn services to businesses, and so you end up with this too many objectives. So my LinkedIn profile is very difficult to put together. Usually, people have are a little bit more focused and don't have their fingers in quite so many pies, and then it makes it a lot easier. To cut a long story short, mine probably isn't the best example to use, but some of the things that I do think work well, the hashtags work well because people follow certain hashtags. So if you quote a hashtag on your LinkedIn profile or in an article that you write or in a blog or in a video, well, not so much in a video, it's more written stuff, but if you quote that hashtag, anybody that's following that hashtag will get sight of what it is that you've communicated. So that's a really good way to target people who've got a specific interest in something.
And I don't see that very often. So you think that would be the keyword-rich words to put in some of your summary as the hashtags?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's just a simple thing. If you can follow certain hashtags, and what that does is it dictates what stuff comes up in your feed. The sort of social media part of your LinkedIn profile where you see other people's posts. So if you're following, hashtag, board advisory, for example, and then somebody posts an article and they put in the article hashtag board advisory, then by rights that should come up in your feed. So that works well. Emojis are another interesting thing. In fact, across the marketing spectrum, emojis and symbols are proven to increase engagement significantly. So if you're sending somebody a marketing email, for example, if you're somebody that specializes in car leasing and you put a couple of car emojis in your subject line of your email, it significantly improves open rates on emails. And the same applies to LinkedIn profiles. If you put a liberal smattering of emojis and symbols throughout your LinkedIn profile, it kind of creates a bit more engagement. People look at you as perhaps, oh, that's quite cool and funky. Where did you get them from? But it just adds a little bit of visual impact as well. So they work great.
Interesting. I'm going to try that on some of the stuff I'm sending out. Now, in terms of, I'd love to come back to your LinkedIn profile for a second, because you were covering lots of different businesses, which is why you've structured the way you have. But for many of our audience, if we say perhaps 80% are aspirational, they're doing something today and they're positioning themselves for something tomorrow. Now, clearly you are leveraging a lot of that. I know we'll get into TL to help how you do that. But in a sense, you almost have two businesses that you're trying to get across. How would you recommend someone structure that?
If they're aspiring to do a certain role, so they're in role X, but they want to move into
maybe they're a CFO now and they want to be on a board, right? So in some ways they're going to be related because that's going to be your area of expertise, but you are positioning yourself in that way.
Yeah. Now, I think that there are lots of things that a CFO would do that would lend itself to being effective if they're in a board advisory NED role. So it's just a question of homing in on those points. So the first thing I would do is I'd think about, who's my target audience? Do I want to target which industry sector, what size of organization? And then I'd be thinking, what challenges do those organizations have? What do they need help with that might make them want to bring someone on board in that board director position? And then I'd start thinking about my own skills. What skills do I have that would be useful to those people? And of course, as a CFO, you might be leading people. Now I look at that and I think, well, no, I'm not going to be leading people in a board advisory role. Okay, I'm really good at leading transformation projects and programs. But you know what? That's not typically what somebody does in that kind of a role. It's what you do as a CFO, but it's not what you would do as a non-exec director. So that's not relevant. But you know what I have done is I've spent a lot of time putting financial governance frameworks across organizations to protect cash flow and profitability. Oh, now all of a sudden that seems like something that might be really quite relevant and useful if somebody's bringing you in that board advisory kind of a role. So you just home in on the stuff that is relevant and leave aside the stuff that isn't so relevant. And as I said earlier, using the summary as your positioning piece rather than talking about what you've done, it's more about what you can do. So it's naturally looking forwards rather than backwards. And it's naturally focusing more on your target audience and their needs and what you can do to help them than it is referring back to your own experience.
Makes sense.
So the summary section, I think sort of almost takes care of itself in that respect.
And I think a lot of this will come back to thought leadership. And we've talked a little about TL when you joined us a month ago, you talked about the thought leadership pyramid. Clearly how you're going to reflect yourself on LinkedIn, not just the articles you post or other social media, what you'll share, but the way you write it, the way you describe it, the way you act is going to come back to your thought leadership. Can we transition to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And it sort of almost brings us full circle because, as we said, you've got your personal brand, which is how the world sees you. And what you communicate through your resume, your CV, your LinkedIn profile, that all comes into the mix. But then there's activity that you can do. And if we go back to that thought leadership pyramid, if I can just ask everybody to imagine a pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid, you know, where it's the widest part of the pyramid at the bottom, you have people who are generalists. And you go up a peg, and just above that, it starts to get a bit more narrow, but there you have people who are specialists. You go up another peg, and then you've got people who are what we would call an authority. And then at the top of the pyramid, you've got people who are a celebrity. Now, don't worry about celebrity. You know, that's your Richard Bransons of this world, and it's very difficult to get to that level. But what you can certainly do is go from generalist to specialist to authority. And that really is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because there actually aren't that many people who bother to go out there and become the authority figure in their industry. Certainly, you know, probably less so in the UK. I think in the US, people are a little bit more into that kind of concept. In the UK, people talk about people being very terribly British and understate.
Right.
And you know, people hold themselves back. But you know, thought leadership's so powerful. If you get out there and start talking about the things that you're an expert in and start educating other people, developing your own intellectual property, and then talking about that through articles and blogs and videos and webinars and podcasts, you get out there and you become the thought leader. You know, a lot of the stuff that I talk to you about, Alexander, you know, it's stuff I've picked up over many, many years, but within my business, we've got an awful lot of our own intellectual property. Mm-hmm. The way that we write resumes and CVs, the way that we write LinkedIn profiles. And when we develop a unique methodology, we usually give it a name. So, for example, we have come to realize that people in general are quite sycophantic. You know, in over here in the UK, we've got things like Celebrity Big Brother and, you know, I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. And it's basically people just kind of these television programs.
Survivor type shows.
Yeah, where there are celebrities and we're all interested in what celebrities do. So it's this kind of sycophanticism within us. And I'll give you a great example how this works on LinkedIn. So I worked with a lady who was a very, very experienced consultant to FTSE 100 CEOs. So she helps FTSE 100 CEOs perform better. And she was all about taking people out of the work environment to fix problems. And it reminded me of a quote by Einstein, the man himself, Einstein, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that it was created.
Huh.
Quite profound, but very true. And it got me thinking that Einstein's quote is exactly what my client does. She just didn't know it was Einstein's theory on this. So what we did is we talked about putting a quote from Einstein, this quote I've just read out to you there, and her quote underneath it. And by doing that, we put her in the same
clever,
same kind of category, the same echelon as Einstein. And it's and whenever we can, whenever it's appropriate, we try to do that when we write LinkedIn profiles for people. It doesn't always work, doesn't always come together, but when it does, it's really, really powerful. And I call that harnessing the inherent sycophanticism of the human animal. And I talk about harnessing the inherent sycophanticism of the human animal on many, many occasions. I'm talking about it now on a podcast that's been broadcast to lots of people all over the world. That's my intellectual property. And that's thought leadership, what I've done right there. And you can all do that. Every person listening into this podcast, if you make a concerted effort to think about what you're an expert in, just decide that you want to be seen as the thought leader, the expert, the go-to person in your sector. Start thinking about what it is that you know an awful lot about. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable person out there. It's not about that. You just have to be knowledgeable and an expert in something. And then start thinking about the things you teach and coach on, the things you do, the things you have knowledge of, and create some intellectual property within that by giving some of these things a name. I did a webinar, actually, and webinars, by the way, are an incredibly powerful tool for thought leadership. I did a webinar on how to use LinkedIn for generating business. And I looked at the stages that I think you need to go through to use LinkedIn as a tool for generating leads. And I looked at the first letter of each word that starts each stage. Mm-hmm. And when I spelt it out with a little bit of jiggling things around, I came up with this little acronym called Sick of It, SICOVIT, Sick of It. And so I called this formula, this framework for generating leads on LinkedIn, Sick of It. Sick of what? Sick of failing on LinkedIn. Yeah. And I brought it to life. And that's what we call blueprinting. We call it blueprinting. That, again, is our intellectual property. That's our term for developing a blueprint, a framework, a system around something that you've got expertise in, giving it its own badge, its own label, bringing it to life through this blueprinting. And that, again, is one of the foundations of thought leadership, because people will start to recognize your terms, your intellectual property, and that really elevates you to this authority status in this thought leadership pyramid we've been talking about.
And I don't think it needs to be hard. So, for example, we talked about social media before. You think about it on Twitter. You can be retweeting. If you start following everybody who's in the space that you want to be, let's say it's boards. If you start following everyone who's an expert and sharing that with your audience, well, now you've already got content and you add a little bit of value and retweet it. Or think about Facebook. You could do one post a day over a week. And maybe 1 or 2 days a week, you're finding a quote by someone famous on the subject, like Einstein or something like that. And maybe a couple of the other days, you're resharing a great article that you read with a little bit of summary from yourself, adding value. And maybe 1 day a week is original thought by yourself, whether it's a blog post or whatever you're doing. And now you're, again, adding value in a consistent way on a consistent theme that people recognize eventually as you move up that pyramid to a specialist, to an authority. So I don't think it needs to be you're suddenly writing a book about it. You're baby stepping your way forward. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. Baby steps, just starting to add value, to just be seen as somebody who's drip feeding their marketplace and their network with useful content that adds value to other people and their lives and their world. And then you can start getting a little bit more sophisticated, as we've said there.
Right.
And I would mention as well, I think webinars are an incredibly accessible thing to do. I'm thinking about people looking for that board advisory, that board director, that non-exec director type role. You pick a certain challenge that, if looking at yourself, Alexander, you specialize in fintech. There are probably certain challenges that fintech companies have that you can help them with. Mm-hmm. If you were to, and I imagine this is probably something you're already doing, but for the benefit of the audience, if you were running regular webinars to people who are in the fintech industry on some of the solutions to the challenges that they have, and people are dialing into those webinars and listening to you and seeing you as the expert and the answer to some of their problems, then of course people will gravitate towards you. Those opportunities will gravitate towards you because you've all of a sudden, just very simply by running a webinar, become an authority in your marketplace. So what you said about baby steps, absolutely. But even some of the more sophisticated and challenging things that people might do are actually simpler than one might think. And it really is often just a question of having the will and the confidence and to get out there and do it.
Makes sense. So, Matt, I feel like on this second episode of the series, we have dropped a huge amount of knowledge in terms of the personal branding and the thought leadership and the execution around that and how you make it happen. We spent a month ago, we talked all about the resume. Clearly, these are tied together. You have to be careful about what you want to be a specialist in, get that authority out there, share that, and have that come across. And I'm so excited that when we bring you back next month to continue this series, we'll be talking about the executive level interview technique, because after you've done this successfully, you'll be getting those opportunities. And now you'd be prepared for the board and what that's like, which again is different from a normal resume and interview type situation you'd be used to. So I know we talked about this last month and you shared there were some specific and unique opportunities for our audience. I know people want to be getting in touch with you. What do we have to share with people? What would you like them to know? Clearly, we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. Well, as the same as last time, we're quite happy for all the listeners to take advantage of a free and high quality and detailed critique of their LinkedIn profile and CV and resume as well. But happy to have a look at your LinkedIn profile and pass them some proper one-to-one feedback on what you've done well, what you've not done so well, and how that can be improved. And then we also have some discounted services that we can offer to the listeners if they decide that they might like some help to put this together. My team of LinkedIn and resume and CV authors that we have here can obviously take away a lot of the heavy lifting and help with that stuff. So yeah, we've got a couple of pages set up on our website that people can go and have a look at. And if they've got any questions, obviously give us a shout.
Well, Matt, I will be sure to link to that in the show notes, but it was a pleasure having you back on the show this month. And thank you so much for sharing your insights and helping all of our audience be boardroom bound.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. Good luck, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Boardroom Bound. I really enjoyed chatting with Matt Craven again. He had joined us a month ago and he's back again. This time we did such a deep dive into personal branding, the thought leadership that you need to build, how that comes together for your audience in all forms of social media, but most especially LinkedIn, since that's the most professional version of it. Matt gave tons of tips for how we would all go about building that for ourselves and creating a position where we're coming from authority. So not a generalist, not a specialist, but someone of authority. And there are easy ways that we unpack together on how to do this. Lots of great information you can take forward, including great opportunities at discounted prices of his team's amazing services for us. And the links for that will be in the show notes, which of course leads me to reminding you that you can head over to podcast.gordon.edu to find the links to those resources. Now, if you've enjoyed this episode, I would ask that you take 30 seconds to leave a review on iTunes. These reviews on iTunes are one of the best ways that we get out word about the show and we help other people find it. Now, thanks for joining me on this episode. I can't wait to share more stories and strategies from brilliant business minds with you again next week. Remember to keep tuning in to be boardroom bound.